It's 5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up in the next hour. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says President Donald Trump's proposal to resettle Gaza's population would only be temporary. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres responds to the Gaza proposal, stressing that it's essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing. Plus, Democratic lawmakers join hundreds to protest shutdown of USAID outside Capitol in Washington, D.C. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says President Donald Trump's proposal to resettle Gaza's population would only be temporary. It follows Mr. Trump's suggestion that the U.S. could take over Gaza and resettle around 2 million Palestinians living there, an idea that has drawn criticism from the UN, human rights groups, and Arab leaders. The U.S. diplomat says the proposal was not hostile, but a generous move showing the willingness of the United States to become responsible for the reconstruction of that area. He said the idea was for Gazans to leave the territory for an interim period while debris was cleared and reconstruction took place. The White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt further clarified the president's comments, saying that the U.S. was not planning to put boots on the ground in the territory. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says Gazans should be allowed to enjoy freedom of exit and immigration, but gave few details on how that would work. Under the international law, attempts to forcibly transfer populations from occupied territories are strictly prohibited. In the meantime, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the rights of Palestinians to live as human beings in their own land is slipping further out of reach. Addressing a meeting of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of Palestinian People in New York, he urged an avoidance of any form of ethnic cleansing. He further pushed for permanent ceasefire and the release of all hostages, calling on the international community to fully fund humanitarian operations and meet urgent needs.
At its essence, the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people is about the right of Palestinians to simply live as human beings in their own land. First, we must keep pushing for a permanent ceasefire and release of all hostages without delay. We cannot go back to more death and destruction. For our part, the UN is working around the clock to reach Palestinians in need and scale up support. That requires humanitarian access that is rapid, safe, unimpeded, expanded, and sustained. I call on member states, donors, and the international community to fully fund humanitarian operations and meet urgent needs. And I once again urge member states to support the essential work of UNRWA. It is vital to stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing. Any durable peace will require tangible, irreversible, and permanent progress toward the two-state solution, an end to the occupation, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Gaza as an integral part.
Meanwhile, spokesperson for the UN chief, Stefan Dujarric, reiterated Mr. Guterres' stance on Mr. Trump's proposal for Gaza that any forced displacement of people is tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Mr. Dujarric says that the Secretary General had spoken with King Abdullah of Jordan over the phone on the issue, and these were the same feelings and fears he expressed. Mr. Dujarric further adds that problems in search of solutions, we shouldn't make problems worse whenever we're in search of solutions, and the solutions should be rooted in the bedrock of international law.
Any forced displacement of people is tantamount to ethnic cleansing. The Secretary General did speak this morning with His Majesty King Abdullah of Jordan on the situation in the region. What the Secretary General will say, and obviously you can quote me freely on this, and you'll quote him when he delivers, that in our search for solutions, we should make the problem worse, and whatever solutions we find need to be rooted in the bedrock of international law. The Secretary General, I think, has been very clear across the world in the many conflicts that we're seeing in clearly calling out violations of international law and reminding member states of their duties to uphold it, and he will continue to do that.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian ambassador Riyad Mansour has commended the work of UNRWA, calling it a fabulous organization that has been serving millions of Palestinian refugees. The head of UNRWA's liaison office in New York also delivered a statement on behalf of Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini, saying UNRWA remains firmly committed to delivering its mandate from the General Assembly until it's no longer possible to do so.
This fabulous organization has been serving millions of Palestinian refugees, and it is carrying a noble activities in the service of our people, particularly in the Gaza Strip, which is in need of the most help that one asks for. We need to rebuild the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a very precious component of the land of the State of Palestine. It is part of our homeland, and we don't have a homeland other than the State of Palestine. So therefore, we are not looking for other homelands or other countries. For those who want us to have a happy place and safe place, we will be delighted to return to our homes inside the State of Israel.
What is clear is that UNRWA remains firmly committed to staying and delivering its mandate from the General Assembly until it is no longer possible to do so. Curtailing our operations now, when the needs are so high and trust in the international community is so low, will undermine the ceasefire. It will sabotage Gaza's recovery and political transition.
Meanwhile, more than 2 weeks into the Gaza ceasefire, the World Food Programme says it has scaled up support for Palestinians with life-saving food assistance, providing almost full rations and hot meals to those most in need. It also restocking bakeries and providing cash to help the people start rebuilding their lives and to start reviving the local economy. According to the WFP, the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains precarious, with over 2 million people fully dependent on food assistance and temporary shelters.
There will need to be a lot of cleanup, rubble removal and reconstruction, obviously. But speaking to people here also, there is some sense of hope, I think, but also confusion. And people are really worried about what's going to happen. Only in 4 or 5 days, 500,000, 500,000 people crossed the Wadi Gaza into north of Gaza. And so we estimate that now there is about 1 million people in the north, about 1 million in the south. We are stepping up. My team here has done a remarkable job. We are back with some 20 bakeries across the strip. Here in the north, we are now opening more bakeries, and we're looking to double our production in the next few days only. We've also got hot meal kitchens going, so that we're serving people meals also as they move along the streets. We're providing the kids with the ready-to-eat food, and we are trying to introduce also cash.
In the United States, hundreds have gathered in Washington, D.C. to protest the shuttering of USAID outside the U.S. Capitol. Democratic lawyers were also part of the demonstrations, describing how the Democrats plan to fight the changes made by U.S. President Donald Trump. The protest was part of a national effort branded 50501, which called for 5051, which called for 50 protests in 50 states on one day to push for Mr. Trump's impeachment and the rejection of the Project 2025, a conservative policy document that critics say is providing a blueprint for the Trump administration.
AID helps make us safer by providing greater stability in very combustible parts of the world. AID supports our values by helping democracy movements around the world. And AID fights disease around the world, which not only saves lives around the globe, but helps prevent them from spreading and killing Americans right here in the United States of America.
We must resist. We must be in the streets. We must take every possible action to stop what is happening. Musk has no right, cannot have the information from the Treasury, cannot have it. The Department of Education is next, the Department of Labor. Resistance all across this nation. We must not let it happen. Right now, we know that across the world, USAID employees are brought back. We know that the programs are being shut down. Don't let it happen. Resist at every motion. And for those of us in Congress, it is no and hell no. If you expect our help, then this has to stop.
I want us to be clear that as Democrats who are coming here and standing in front of you, it is our duty to hold the line. It is our duty to act and not just talk. It is our duty to hold our votes. It is our duty to ensure that this administration doesn't take us back to an America in 1952, an apartheid America.
People that put their families at risk to make sure that we are helping people around the world so that we can also stay safe here at home. They are people who are real patriots. They stand alongside our military and others to make sure that the world knows who we are as Americans and that we care. They are the individuals who fight to make sure that when we working collective together, that we will get rid of HIV and AIDS with PEPFAR.
Many of whom I saw shed blood and die for this country, and they were sent there by billionaires and energy executives and others who sacrificed nothing, who made profit off of those wars, and that's why I'm actually standing here today. I ran for Congress to prevent that from happening again, and that's why many of you are here today. Because we owe it to our young men and women, we owe it to our fellow Americans not to do that again.
In the meantime, a U.S. federal judge has blocked Donald Trump's attempts to end birthright citizenship for children born to parents who are in the country legally or temporarily. Maryland District Judge Deborah Boardman ruled that every baby born on U.S. soil is a citizen upon birth, and that's the law and tradition. The ruling extends the existing pause on Mr. Trump's 20th January executive order until the legal process plays out, which could take months or even years. The Trump administration can appeal the ruling and is expected to do so. Ending birthright citizenship is part of President Trump's drive to remove illegal immigrants from the United States. His order, which was scheduled to come into effect on February 19, would have withheld automatic citizenship rights from newborns if neither of their parents was a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. A lot to unpack here. Maria Bird, our Channel CV correspondent, joins us now from Washington, D.C. Hello, Maria.
Hello.
So what more can you tell us about the protests? We understand it was across the country, 50-51 it was branded.
Yes, these protests are all up and down from the Capitol to the various agencies across the city. And so this is obviously a time in American history that many people are questioning the moves from the current administration. Many people are looking at how this could have long-term impacts on the world, not just the United States. And I know the one that many people have showed outrage around is USAID. USAID has been a long-standing aid agency that the U.S. has had that has impacted the entire world. Not only safety and security around the world, but also safety right here at home. And so reducing that agency and what many are calling a gutting of most agencies across the United States and the federal government is one that they are very concerned about the viability of the federal government as these guttings are occurring. And so we know that Elon Musk was in Washington, and we know that many are saying that he is part of the process for this gutting and these cutting, these efficiency efforts that they're being stated by the Trump administration.
And many are also seeing legal battles. We're also seeing legal battles, and challenges to the president's ban on birthright citizenship. Many reiterate the call that it's against the law, it's against the U.S. Constitution, and is expecting the Trump administration to appeal the ruling. What else do we expect? I understand it could take months or even years.
Yes, because the birthrights piece is a constitutional right, we know that most Americans, at some point, their parents were not born in America. And so that's where the birthright piece comes into place, because most Americans gain their citizenship through that Birthrights Act. So regardless of how in which you came to the United States, that has always been a constitutional right, which it was expected that the courts would overturn that. And the real question is how the Trump administration will respond to that. And I think that they'll end up giving clarity around what they really mean around this Birthrights Act. So this was expected, and I think that many do believe that this will be something that, to your point, if it is ever able to go in place, it will take a very long time, because this is something that has been indoctrinated within our Constitution.
And what happens now to children being born after, the February deadline that the president gave? That people born on U.S. soil will no longer, get that, birthright opportunity. What happens to baby? Are they also able to process, their passports once they're born before any legal challenges to this ruling?
Well, the greatest piece is the Constitution would have to change. And so until the Constitution changes, there can be things that can try to enact it, but obviously through the judicial system, potentially can be overturned due to precedent and the constitutional right.
Right, Maria, let's talk about President Trump's recent comments on Gaza, which has elicited a lot of reactions, across the world, from the Middle East and, other countries. How are Americans reacting to this?
I think some are surprised. I think they weren't quite clear on how that was the thought process with the administration. I think others are not. I think that it's been also stated that due to the president's background in real estate development, that was more so the intention there. But I think that you're going to have, obviously his team has been trying to clarify exactly what he meant through that. And so we know that his goal is to support Israel, and that has kind of been part of the U.S.'s support system, regardless of what administration there has been. Obviously, through organizations like USAID and other nonprofit organizations, the focus has been on peace in the Middle East and really being able to support Palestinians that are suffering as well. And so the question is he going to address, is the administration going to address the peace issue and how they plan to address those Palestinians who are victims of what's the turmoil in the Middle East and in Gaza?
Right, although Secretary of State Marco Rubio says it's only going to be temporary relocation, you just said that, no one knows how Mr. Trump, was planning to, see this through. But then again, the countries that he suggested that the Palestinian people relocate to, while his plan, goes ahead, have also rejected this plan. So what happens? Do you think that Mr. Trump was just, letting his thoughts out without thinking it through, really? Or do you think there's really an actual plan that he wants to push through to ensure that it does work? Because for many who know Donald Trump, a lot of times he usually gets what he wants.
So, to your point, the question is, has this been a campaign strategy? It doesn't appear as if taking over Gaza was a campaign strategy. And so I think that, to your point, whether or not these were discussion points that he has brought forth, and whether or not the plan will be developed, if a plan will be developed at a later time, I think that's really kind of where we are. Your point around the other countries that have rejected what he has stated, I think that there's going to be a requirement for further conversation. And I think also, too, he's going to be working with Israel to figure out what exactly is the best course of action. So I think the real piece is that he oftentimes will be very clear about his thoughts to try to move things forward. And I think the real question is, I think what he's looking for is to be able to address the issues in Gaza that are in alignment with the way in which the U.S. believes the policy should be moving forward. So I think his goal is to be able to move that forward. And so being very clear and directive in nature is a way in which, to your point, that he has utilized those tactics to move things in the direction that he is hopefully will move in, but most importantly, to resolve the issues that exist in Gaza.
Right, and finally, why do you think that the United Nations is concerned that, President Trump's proposal might result in some kind of ethnic cleansing?
Well, when you look at what has been stated, and when you start to put the pieces together, we know that the issues around Israel and Palestine have been one that have focused on ethnic challenges, one that many people in the U.S. have been very clear about not even supporting, oftentimes, whether or not it's President Trump or President Biden's position on Gaza and on Israel and on Palestine. And so that is par for the course if you look at the way in which he has expressed what he's thinking to do and how he supports these efforts. But I don't think that Americans are surprised. And I think, to your point, the question is whether or not the global community is going to support something like that, which I don't think the global community will support something of that nature. And I think that Americans as a whole will be very clear about that. As you stated before, there are protests all up and down the streets of the United States. And I think that that is an issue, even though it's not on U.S. soil, that Americans will be very strong and committed to, and our congressional members very strong and committed to ensuring the safety and security for all people, regardless of being Israeli or Palestinian.
All right, Maria, thanks again. We continue with issues in the United States. U.S. deportation policies have long been a contentious issue under President Donald Trump. The country saw a significant crackdown on illegal migration. One notable example is the deportation of hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants, including those with no criminal records. Upon taking office on January 20, the Trump administration launched the nationwide sweep arresting hundreds of people suspected of being in the country illegally. This effort is part of the administration's push to enforce immigration laws and secure the border. During his first week in office, President Trump signed 10 executive orders on immigration and issued many edicts to carry out promises of mass deportations and border security. So far, many have been flown back to Colombia, India, and even the first flights of undocumented immigrants from the U.S. to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba have landed. However, critics argue that these policies have led to the separation of families, detention of asylum seekers, and increased fear among immigrant communities. Joining us now for more on this is Bibi Georgeville, a U.S. analyst in Tennessee. Bibi, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Right. So the issue of deportation remains complex, with ongoing debates about national security, economic impact, and of course human rights. How do U.S. deportation policies affect the economy, particularly in industries reliant on immigrant labor such as agriculture, and construction?
That's a good question. We all know deportation is costly, right? But then the long-term cost of allowing illegal migrants to remain in any country is far greater. If we allow illegal migrants, to remain in a country like the United States, it will only put more strain on public resources, like let's say healthcare, housing, food, education, social services, you name it. And because they do not pay taxes, but they use public services, it puts a strain on taxpayers and could lead to higher taxes in order to cover, the cost. And I think industries like agriculture, like, you just mentioned, and construction, they do not have to rely on migrant labor because there are work visa programs available. And I think that enforcing immigration laws will encourage businesses to follow proper hiring practices. I mean, if you think about it for a second, let's just look at this critically. Undocumented workers are often paid way below the minimum wage. They are being exploited. So the solution to crop picking is not, because everybody keeps talking about crop picking and who's going to pick the crops in the United States. The solution is not to rely on undocumented workers, but to encourage them to apply for legal visas, like we have the H-2A and H-2B visas, for them to work in agriculture and construction and earn better pay under U.S. labor laws. That's my opinion on that.
As the U.S. continues to grapple with this immigration reform, the fate of millions of undocumented immigrants hangs in the balance. What are the short-term and long-term effects on family separation and detention on the mental and physical health of migrants and their families? I do understand, what you have said about, seeking legal ways to stay in the country, but then this has happened, and there are also mental and other, physical implications.
Well, I think the law is the law, despite one's citizenship status. I mean, even when U.S. citizens, U.S. citizens commit crimes, their families are separated, and their children may sometimes be placed in foster care. So why then should illegal migrants be exempt from this law? I believe, entering the United States illegally is a crime. Whether or not someone is a violent offender, it doesn't change the fact that they have broken the law. They should not be treated any differently. And I think the best way to avoid separation is to come in legally. It's as simple as that. You see, this migrants that come through the border illegally, they're exposed to risks. Their families are exposed to smugglers and traffickers. And, I know people have argued that Trump is being inhumane towards the migrants. But then what people are ignoring is that these individuals did in fact break the law. They entered the country illegally and committed a crime by doing so. If someone is a criminal, they get arrested and they are put in handcuffs, right? I mean, that's the law. So I don't understand why there's an issue with treating illegals the same way Americans who break the law are treated. That's it.
Right. And during the five-nation tour of Central America this month, the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, insisted on well-known and tough solutions to the illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border. In your opinion, have U.S. deportation policies been effective in reducing illegal immigration?
Yes. The policies have been effective. Many people are already self-deporting. And in my opinion, Trump's approach, including, publicizing the issue, has been very strategic. By Trump publicizing these deportations, he's clearly sending a message to discourage future illegal migrants. It's very clear that what he's doing is setting a clear precedent for how anyone who illegally enters the United States will be treated And, he's trying to deter everyone who's watching, showing everyone that the consequences of entering the country legally is that you will be rough-handled. So this strategy, I think, sends a strong message about the importance of following the law.
And on international relations now, how have U.S. deportation policies impacted diplomatic relationships, with countries like Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras?
Strict policies. The strict policies push countries like Mexico and Canada to take responsibility for their citizens and their borders, since most of these migrants coming through these borders. Like only recently, President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Colombian imports after Colombia refused to accept deportation flights that were carrying Colombian nationals. To me, I think it was a good strategy because the tariffs were lifted after Colombia agreed to accept their citizens. And I think that's the kind of leadership that I want to see, putting your country first and holding other countries accountable when they refuse to take responsibility. So I think these countries that do not take back the deported citizens should face consequences. That's my opinion.
And what potential changes to U.S. deportation policies could be expected under future administrations? How might these changes impact migrant communities and the broader immigration landscape? That's if the Republicans lose power in the next 4 years, for instance, or if they remain in power. You never know what's going to happen with the new administration.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think one solution should be to secure the borders and to enforce strict immigration laws to ensure that everyone who enters the country does so legally, and that those who come in illegally should be required to leave. I also think that the leaders of these other countries where the migrants are coming from should focus on fixing issues within their own nation so that their citizens won't feel the need to go elsewhere. I know that most people don't like to hear the truth, but let's imagine for a quick second, if people all over the world, say Venezuela or other countries, walked into Nigeria illegally, how would Nigerians feel if outsiders crossed our borders illegally, and started taking jobs from Nigerian citizens and even commit crimes like assaulting women and children? Would Nigerians be okay with that? So it's the same situation here. The frustration is not about immigration itself, but more about people putting other people's lives at risk. So if people want to move to the US or any country for that matter, I think they should do so legally. So I've lived in the United States for 13 years now, and I can tell you this much, that this country welcomes legal migrants like myself. The problem is mainly about illegal entry, and I think those countries that refuse to cooperate in taking back their citizens after deportation should also be held accountable. So that's about it. They should limit their access to public benefits. We're talking about Republicans, so I do agree with certain policies that would, limit access to free healthcare, housing, and education. All this will help reduce the financial burden on taxpayers, And I also agree with the Remain in Mexico policy by President Trump. I think it should be reinstated. And I think, asylum seekers should be required to wait in designated areas outside the U.S. until their cases are processed. So this would help minimize the impact on U.S. resources. Right. Thank you.
Bibi, a pleasure having you again on the program.
Oh, thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, Panama has denied making changes to allow U.S. government vessels to transit the Panama Canal for free, following White House claims it had agreed to such a move. The State Department said in a statement on X that its government vessels can now transit the Panama Canal without charging fees, saving the U.S. government millions of dollars a year. Responding to the comments, the Panama Canal Authority said it was empowered to set tolls and other fees for transiting the canal, adding that it had not made any adjustments to them. U.S. President Donald Trump had repeatedly voiced his desire to retake control of the waterway, which is key to global trade. The 51-mile Panama Canal cut across the Central American nation and is the main link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has been on a visit to Latin American countries this week, demanded that Panama make immediate changes to what he calls the influence and control of China over the canal. Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte has been impeached on a range of accusations that include plotting to assassinate the president, large-scale corruption, and failing to strongly denounce China's aggressive actions against Filipino forces in the disputed South China Sea. Wednesday's move by legislators in the House of Representatives, many of them allies of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., deepens a bitter political rift between the two highest leaders of one of Asia's democracies. President Marcos has boosted defense ties with his country's treaty ally, the U.S., while the vice president's father, former President Rodrigo Duterte, nurtured cozy relations with China and Russia during his stormy term that ended in 2022. His daughter is yet to comment on her impeachment, but her representative, Paulo Duterte, says that it's a clear act of political persecution, accusing rival lawmakers of maneuvering to quickly collect signatures and push the impeachment case to the Senate. The vice president has repeatedly accused her boss, his wife, and his cousin, House Speaker Martin Romualdez, of corruption, weak leadership, and attempting to muzzle her because of speculation she may seek the presidency in 2028 after Marcos' 6-year term ends. Elsewhere now, Swedish police are still investigating the motive behind the country's deadliest mass shooting as local media began reporting details about the gunman. The suspect, named in reports as 35-year-old local man Rickard Anderson, was reported to be a former student of the school in Örebro, a city 157 kilometers west of Stockholm, where the attack took place on Tuesday. 11 people died in the shooting, including the attacker, with at least 6 others injured. The attack has sent shockwaves through the nation, with King Carl XVI Gustav on Wednesday saying all of Sweden is mourning. Authorities are still yet to release details about the dead and injured. Health officials said 3 women and 2 men are in critical but stable condition, while another woman is being treated for minor injuries. Well, in other news now about the DRC, Malawi's President Lazarus Chakwera has ordered his military troops to begin preparing to withdraw from their peacekeeping mission in the volatile eastern area. The Malawian troops are part of the Southern Africa's regional bloc's military mission to deploy to DRC to help tackle armed groups. The instruction comes in the wake of the killing of at least 20 peacekeepers, including 14 South Africans and 3 Malawians, as the M23 rebels captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, last week. President Chakwera said his order is meant to honor the ceasefire declaration. Staying with the DRC, a top official from the United Nations Organization Civilization Mission reports that there's relative calm in Goma, but the situation is still highly volatile with persistent risk of escalation. Viviane van der Peer, who is the special representative of the Secretary General for Protection and Operations, was addressing a press conference in New York virtually. She adds that while the rebel group M23's February 4 unilateral ceasefire offers assurances that Bukavu will not be taken, there are concerns about Kavumu Airport, which is critical for ongoing civilian and humanitarian use around South Kivu.
In Goma, we remain under occupation. the situation is still highly volatile with a persistent risk of escalation. The March 23 movement, M23, and the Rwandan Defense Forces continue to consolidate their control over Goma, and the majority of the territories of North Kivu, the armed group has previously seized. All exit routes from Goma are under their control, and the airport, also under M23 control, is closed until further notice. The situation in South Kivu is also particularly concerning, with heavy fighting reported along the main route between Kinyezire and Nyabibwe. In Bukavu, tensions are rising as the M23 moves closer, just 50 kilometers north of the city. While the 4 February unilateral ceasefire announced by the M23 offers assurances that Bukavu will not be taken, we are gravely concerned for Kavumu Airport, which is critical for ongoing civilian and humanitarian use around South Kivu.
Meanwhile, DRC Communications Minister Patrick Muyaya has alleged that the EU is complicit in Rwanda stealing resources amid the ongoing conflict between the army and M23 militants. He was speaking during an exclusive interview from Kinshasa on Tuesday. Mr. Muyaya also claimed the M23 militant group doesn't exist and is a proxy group used by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. He discounted the group's claims that it's fighting for the rights of ethnic Tutsis as lies.
The ground actually is very catastrophic. We are still counting how many of these people died after the President Kagame decided to attack Goma. Yesterday, the first number we get was telling us that there were more than 2,000 people who've been killed and more than 3,000 who've been hurt, and some of them need to have some close treatments. And we are hoping that no one will die between those 3,000 people. That the situation in the ground, it's very dramatic, and that the urgent question for the government, we are working to find a way to send them some assistance in we can send from Kinshasa. I don't think we should speak about M23. M23 doesn't exist. It's a proxy group used by the President Kagame. As you can see, the video, those who operated in Goma was Rwandan different forces. Even if the President Kagame is losing a bit his memory by saying that he doesn't know if there is any troop of his army inside DRC, it's clear that for us, M23 doesn't exist. And as government, we will do our best to make sure we don't keep our population under the control of those people who are there to bring terror and to kill some of them. So we will do our best to make sure our population are safe. So if we need to retake Goma, we will do what we have to do as government to make sure we give security to our population. The best way to protect civilians now is to ask President Kagame to leave DRC, because it's him and his army who is operating in this part of DRC. Those proxies doesn't have power, doesn't have ammunition, doesn't have those weapons to do what they've been doing in the past days, not only in Goma, but in the neighborhood of this city. So it's simple. The best way to protect our civilians is to make sure the President Kagame left him and his troops in this part of our territory so we can take care of our own population.
We head to South Africa, where the National Coordinator of Mining Affected Communities United in Africa, Meshach Mbengula, is urging the South African government to recognize and support artisanal mining. He argues that formalizing the sector could create thousands of jobs, especially in rural and mining-affected communities where employment opportunities are limited. Mr. Mbangula believes that with proper regulation, artisanal mining can be transformed into a sustainable source of livelihood. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samusa, reports.
While the mining indaba is underway in Cape Town, members of the mining-affected communities United in Africa, Makua, took to the streets of Pretoria, marching to the Department of Mineral Resources under the theme, "Nothing about us without us." The demonstration brought together hundreds of affected community members who delivered a memorandum of grievances to the department's offices in the capital.
About issue of artisanal miners. not benefiting, pollution, and unemployment. So we're saying here, we want to see the artisan miners, zamas, being formalized and be able to contribute to the economy of the country and be able to put bread on the table. Not having so-called investors who are coming to loot minerals without benefiting us and taking them to the Western countries. We are here to make sure that those voices are being heard.
Meanwhile, some are demanding the resignation of South Africa's minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, following her recent remarks that the government will smoke out illegal miners.
As the minister in that office expressed herself in the most callous manner that shows a most brutal disregard for the lives of these miners. So we say that he must resign. We say that she must be accountable if she was directly, in particular, for the approval and also for some decision that led to the death of these miners.
As South Africa grapples with the challenges in its mining sector, communities affected by mining continue to demand recognition, support, and a seat at the table. With calls for policy changes and ministerial accountability growing louder, the question remains, will the government heed their demands? For now, Makua and its supporters say their fight is far from over. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Simos, Channel.
We're in Europe now. Thousands of students, educators and retirees took to the streets in Belgrade on Wednesday in support of education workers who recently went on strike in solidarity with student-led anti-government protests. Rally participants marched through the streets towards the Ministry of Education building with banners and placards reading, "Count on us, we won't disgrace our profession and for a healthier future," among others. The protesters also observed 15 minutes of silence to commemorate victims of the accident in Novi Sad. The student protests themselves are part of a series of anti-government demonstrations following the deadly train station canopy collapse in Novi Sad on November 1, 2024, which killed 15 people. Prime Minister Milos Vučević quit on January 28. Following the months of protests, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić announced he would decide within 10 days whether to call parliamentary elections or form the new government after the Prime Minister resigned to avoid further complicating things. In the UK, a government decision to dismantle Grenfell Tower has been met with anger by some bereaved relatives and survivors. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner told a meeting on Wednesday that the West London Tower block, where a fire killed 72 people in 2017, would be dismantled to ground level. But a spokesperson for Grenfell United, which represents some of the bereaved families and survivors, said no one at the meeting supported it and people had been ignored. There has been several years of debate over the future of the 24-story tower, with some hoping it will remain in place as a lasting reminder of the tragedy and others wanting it replaced with a new memorial. The Artificial Intelligence Everything Global World Summit has kicked off in Abu Dhabi with the announcement that the UAE capital will host the event annually starting from 2026. The first day of the summit showcased various activities, including a speech by UAE Minister of State for AI, Digital Economy and Remote Work Applications, Umar Al-Ulama, attended by scientists and visitors. He highlights the significant progress the UAE has made in the field of AI. According to the Emirates News Agency, the current edition of the AI World event includes both the summit held in Abu Dhabi and the exhibition at Expo Dubai, which will take place on February 5 to 6. The agency also reported that the event features over 200 speakers, 500 AI executives, and 150 leading international investors managing assets worth $70 billion.
You can get everything. So you in charge, and similarly on the other end, to build the trust among citizens.
Join me in welcoming to the stage the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence.
That's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.